ABCD interest group. Oh, yeah. Welcome to the ABCD interest group. It's been a while since this group has last met. Last year at the at the TDWG workshop week. Nevertheless, a couple of things have happened in the past year. So I would like to start with with this short report on what has happened, even though not that much. First of all, in the technical architecture group, the TDWG Tech, there was the discussion on how to ratify XML standards within the standards documentation standard, the SDS, and because the SDS was not really written for XML standards, it's just for individual terms, and so we have this issue now with the re-ratification of ABCD2 under the SDS rules, but we're also not the only ones. So the Plinian core group also had this issue, and so we met a couple of times online and looked at, okay, what are the commonalities here and what would be needed to sufficiently document the SDS standards. And since we do have a bit of time, hold on, let me share my screen. I can quickly go into the slides that we gave there to present to the technical architecture group on how this could be done. There's not so much like a guideline, more of a potential way, and so the idea here is that we we look, okay, what do we need for an XML standard to be documented under the SDS? Or first in general, should XML standards be documented in the first place? And so general consensus is yes. And SDS has a lot of advantages. It provides a lot of the documentation that is needed for the individual terms. It provides general guidelines that document styles and structure, which will help to make it feel the same with other modern TDWG standards. So people who are familiar with one then have easy to figure out other standards. But the part that is actually missing is the information about the structure and the context of the terms. So what do I mean by that? So in the SDS, we have for an individual term the different information items that you can have. Some of them are normative, meaning they are the core part of the standard and cannot be changed without re-ratification, whereas others can be easily adjusted. For instance, examples or usage notes are quite easy to adjust and add additional examples to a term. And so what we have for the XML standard would be the term structures. And there are two ways to see this, one being the schema file. Both Plinian core and ABCD2 are using XSSD as a schema, but there are also other ways like relaxng or the DTD files. Our idea is to have those files as the normative definition of a term. And then we do have the individual X path of a term, meaning that for each term, it is clear where within the XML tree it sits. So X path describing the location. And one of the open issues, or the issues that we encounter is how do we handle element reuse? So we have the same element here. In this case, we have a reference which has both a text and a URI. And this appears in different parts of the standard. Different elements can have references. So this reference element is reused at multiple occasions. Now there are two options to handle this. One is to say, okay, we have one element for reference, which has a definition, and we then have multiple XPaths showing the different or different places where it can occur. And the other option would be to have multiple reference elements, each within a context. So we have section 1 reference, section 2 reference, and each of them having their own definitions. They could be identical, but they could also be slightly adjusted depending on the context. And the way we have documented those things in ABCD so far would be option 2. The way that the Plinian core group preferred it would be option 1. So our idea here is just to say, okay, both are good options, both have advantages and disadvantages. Let's each group decide which way they prefer. And we have found a couple of other things that are still open questions or potential issues. This approach that we outlined does not work if we have mixed content. So this is not so much the case for data standards. I'm not aware of any that actually do this, but for markup sections, this is quite common, mixing those. So having one element that contains both text and other elements. And then our approach would also break down if we do have loops or nestings. So one upper element then appearing within itself. So for instance, for HTML as a markup language, this is quite common, saying you can have multiple nested diffs, and each diff can then have the same elements within it. And a couple of other special cases are also covered by this approach, so we don't really need to worry about that. Attributes just are marked as an attribute. And for the ordering, so far for most of the standards, the order in which elements appear is not really important for the context, though most XML standards do describe this order really explicit. So for instance, in ABCD, you cannot just simply switch the order of 2 elements. It would break the validity. But this could be documented by specifying each element as its position within the parent element. However, this would need to be done based on the XPath. So if we have the same element used in multiple contexts, each of those XPath would need to have this documentation tied to it. And quite similar to the cardinality of the elements, this is again defined in the schema, but information like, is it required, or is it optional, or is it repeatable? And then we have those different notations of 1, 0 to 1, 0 to n, or 1 to n, that could express this, again, can be documented based on the XPath. And then, so far we only looked at those 2 XML standards that are already standards and now want to have SDS compliance. But we didn't look at the other way around, saying, okay, which however does it work for a standard to that is already an SDS standard and now wants to add a structural layer on top of it. And then a couple of other questions on how do we handle the generation of the documentation, and does this approach also work if we have a JSON schema? It should work. There's also JSON path instead of XPath, but again, we didn't really look into the details of those matters. And one other edge case that came up was Plinian Core had a couple of elements that have a really lot of XPath associated to it. So here, with a small example, it's quite easy. We do have 4 points where an XPath can occur, but if we have a couple of hundred, then this makes it really, really hard to see. For that case, for the human readable description, we were able to find a way of collapsing the elements once the list of terms gets too long. So this is like a quick summary of this collaboration with Plinian Core and the demo we gave to the technical architecture group. And still no. Are there any questions regarding that part? Not okay. Then we can continue. Or no, let me just double paste again for all of the people who joined a bit later. Here we have the link to the agenda for today. Please add yourself to the list. And 2 screens. Yeah, and then we also, I also gave based on this demo, a presentation at the TEDWG conference 2 weeks ago, and no, wait, 3 weeks ago, in terms of where are we with the ratification of, or re-ratification of ABCD2 and ABCD EFG under the STS rules. So as I just mentioned, it needs to be done because ABCD EFG yes, it's in the ratification process, but ABCD2 has been ratified for so long that it doesn't match those STS rules. And for the compatibility, we were approached by the executive committee last year and asked whether we can just could please re-ratify ABCD under those rules. And I'm working on this. There's still a couple of issues to fix out, but to iron out. But in general, we made some progress. Don't want to go into the slides here again. I guess most of you have already seen this, or even if you haven't been at that meeting, at that session, you can watch the video that is linked in the Slack channel. So this was a symposium 15. And yeah, unless there are like any specific questions, or for those who were present and still remembered, yeah, regarding that that presentation. No questions here. Okay. Then yeah, I would like to get to the question of how should this interest group work. So far, like the activity is the meeting once a year here within the TEDWG workshop week. But in preparation for today, and also like the parts of the ratification for ABCD2 and ABCD EFG, there were a couple of things where I thought, okay, it would be nice to get the feedback of a larger group on this, and to have some group consensus in which direction to head. So I would like this group to meet a bit more often, and that yeah, I don't know, as a frequency that is both practical yet also not too much work. I thought maybe like every 3 months would be a good one, and just wanted to get your input, and maybe while we're at it, also find a next date that would be suitable. Any comments, Steve?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm sorry I came in late, but so I'm just wanting to, and this may be under the charter revision thing, but is it, am I correct in thinking that this group is turned into a maintenance group, right? Or not? I mean, like, if that's the case, then then you have the official status as a maintenance group, and then stuff that happens with ABCD is all in your hands, as opposed to like needing a review manager. I just was looking at the charter and it doesn't like say that.
Yeah,
but
the charter is quite outdated, but it's on the, even though the page is hidden on the in the TDWG website, so the community page is hidden, but there this group is listed as both an interest group and a maintenance group, and I think I've seen that with some other as well.
I was just looking at the Google Doc you linked there.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay.
Well, I
Yeah,
just wanted to confirm that, because like with respect to like your question of how often should you meet and stuff like that, I mean, like the other interest groups, it's pretty they meet as often as they need to meet, basically. Like the Audubon, when I was doing Audubon Corps maintenance group, we met every, like, I don't know, 3 months. Darwin Corps maintenance group doesn't ever really meet. They just like have emails. So it's like pretty flexible. But I think the answer to the question you're asking depends on like what's the task of the group. And that's why I kind of wanted to clarify, like, is this group the maintenance group? And if so, then how much maintaining does it have to do?
Yes, I certainly see this group as the maintenance group for ABCD. And then, so I just looked it up because I wasn't quite sure about this, but if you, on the website, for instance, for the Darwin Corps, it lists both as an interest group and as a maintenance group. And it also does for the really old ABCD community page. And yeah, I don't want to like.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that from the standpoint of how they're listed, that's probably an error in documentation and not in like status, because the Darwin Corps interest group doesn't exist anymore. And this is a question I brought up in the executive committee, like we've got to stop listing groups that don't exist anymore on the website. But having the status of the maintenance group is special in the sense that you get certain power placed into your hands with respect to controlling the process. And that's why it would be, if that's what you're doing, I would explicitly say that in your charter revisions, like this is now the ABCD maintenance group, and then you have all the powers that are in the vocabulary maintenance specification with respect to handling changes to the standard and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. That's a good point, and it's good to know that there's like an issue of yeah, of a website displaying something wrong, and not just a feature of the community that something can be both. But yeah, I thought it would be quite fitting to have both of them, but if we do have to decide, I'd say the purpose of this group would be the maintenance of ABCD, and thus it should be the ABCD maintenance group. I
mean, the distinction would be that a task group has a particular task. So you could have the maintenance group, and then you could have a task group whose task was to revise or to revise ABCD 2.0 to conform to the standards documentation specification. And that would be totally, then the task group would be operating under the maintenance group. And that's different from like, if you have a new standard with a task group, they're not operating under anybody. And therefore, when they are done, the executive committee has to appoint a review manager. But if you have a maintenance group and the task group is operating under that, then the maintenance group is in charge of the process. So, you know, so I would make the maintenance group first, and then if the maintenance group wants to charter a task group that's responsible to them, you could certainly do that.
Yeah, no, certainly the question was never whether this being a task group, but first, so from what I get from you is that you recommend that this group should become the ABCD maintenance group and not the ABCD interest group.
Yeah, I mean the maintenance group. So if you look at the vocabulary maintenance specification, what it says is that a maintenance group is a special kind of interest group. So it would be an interest group. In fact, yeah. I think it calls them a maintenance interest group, but people just sort of drop off the interest group part because it's too long. But it's special in the sense that it can't go away. Like you could, if an interest group isn't doing anything and the executive committee says like, you're not doing anything and nobody cares about this, they could disband the group. A maintenance group can't ever be disbanded because they have a permanent job, which is maintaining the standard.
It is tied to the standard.
It's tied to the maintenance of the standard. So unless the standard is retired, if the maintenance group, say, isn't doing their job, then the executive committee would get a new convener as opposed to like disbanding the group. So that's really the main distinction. There's a permanence to being a maintenance group, and also they have power granted to them to manage the change process, which a normal interest group doesn't have. So those are kind of like the two distinctions there.
Okay, yeah. No, I completely agree that yes, this would really fit the description of this group and saying, okay, this is the maintenance group. But when you said like a maintenance group is a special kind of interest group, then those double labels on the website are not really wrong. So they might as well just keep them. But yes.
Yeah, I mean, you could call it the maintenance interest group if you wanted to, but there would only be one group.
Yeah, okay. I understand.
But one question, Steve, is can the term maintenance group be applied for a standard which has not been properly ratified according to the new rules?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think there isn't. I'm not sure that there is a rule about that, because this special case of the 2000. Well, okay, no, actually there is a precedent, because the Tax on Concepts, TCS2, which is another 2005 standard, just like ABCD, they do have a maintenance group, and that charter's been approved. So that has already been established as okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's for exactly the same reason. It's that maintenance group has a task group, which is tasked with revising it, and the process is in the hands of that maintenance group. I mean, in that case, most of the people in the task group and the maintenance group are the same people, not entirely, but mostly they're the same people, but they just have a different like administrative role. And the same thing could be true here.
Okay, so thanks, Steve, for that input and the distinctions. Yeah, I guess this is when you later look at that charter, then we should really make this clear that this is yeah, in maintenance group of ABCD, or the maintenance group of ABCD. yeah, but going back to the question on like how regular should we meet, and when would be yeah a good next point. Any comments from the group on that?
So my David, my I don't know, gut feeling is that once a year is not enough. 4 times a year is maybe a little bit too much, so I would vote for twice a year to start with. And if it turns out that it's not enough, we can of course increase the frequency anytime.
Okay. Yeah. So the question is, would it make sense to now look for already a new date, or should I think I'm going to skip that part now and say, okay, let's first go a bit further in terms of yeah, I should have changed this when creating the agenda. The question like, who actually is part of this group? And so each year for the interest group meetings, when there's this public call and people can just join in to see, okay, who yeah, who wants to see what is going on with the different groups. It's kind of a different audience than just like the question who actually considers themselves part of the ABCD maintenance group. Well, yeah, and so I would yeah, like to ask all of you, who of you would be interested in being a regular member of the group?
Do you want us to raise hands or
yeah,
or say something?
Yeah, yes, either way, or just thumbs up. Yeah, Anton, Jörg, of course. William, when I discovered when I looked at the really old community page, the one that I previously linked to, you actually mentioned on there as well. You're one of the few people that yeah, where I think, okay, that's worth asking whether they still want to be in that group, because a couple of people have been out of the community for yeah, several years already. What about you? Do you still consider yourself part of the ABCD interest group?
I guess. I mean, I always attend to what development is going forward. I'm probably not very active though, as some of the group have been throughout the years.
No problem. I guess.
Sure, I can.
Christian, you turned on your webcam.
Sorry.
Christian, you turned on your webcam. Did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, I mean, you deserve a response in any case. So ABCD is an important exchange format for the MFN, for the Museum für Naturkunde in Berlin. And I have been under-focused what concerns ABCD. So I need to focus more also on ABCD. As such, I would like to focus a bit more on this area, and I may be able to commit to actually being a member of the interest group during the course of the next year. I hesitate to make a commitment right now. Okay. Because of other stuff that's going on.
Yeah, understandable. Yeah.
Can I make
Yeah, sure.
a comment, another sort of administrative comment about this. So from the like TDWG process point of view, the interest groups have a convener, and then they have core members. And the core members, the main criteria is they're basically the people who commit to show up to the meetings and who could potentially take over for the convener if the convener can't do their job. There's nothing very specific about what it means to be a regular member, and how that's treated depends on the group. Like in Audubon Corps, basically anybody who showed up to a meeting was a regular member, and because everything was pretty much done on consensus, there wasn't any like issue about voting. So I think, you know, kind of the question I think you're asking is who has a commitment level enough to be a core member for the group, and in terms of like how that would be defined, usually it gets put in the charter as the, you know, they're the conveners and then they're the core members, but the charters are kind of become stale, and so typically the core members are listed on either the landing page of the, or not the landing page, but the interest group page on the website, or on the GitHub landing page for the group. Like that's what I think Darwin Corps and Audubon Corps, because there's turnover and stuff there. I think the maintenance group web page says like the members are listed on the GitHub site or something like that. So anyway, basically, I think what you need to do is you're asking who can commit to be a core member of the group, and then anybody could be like a regular member. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, and it's also kind of like also purely practical things like who to send an email to for a doodle for upcoming appointments, something like that. And yeah, certainly this is a good distinction that of course not all core members not all regular members need to be core members, so yeah. And I also already have two other people on the list. So Walter Behrensen agreed to be still part of that group, even though he's not a convener anymore. And Andreas Altenburger from the Arctic University Museum of Norway couldn't be here today, but he sent me an email and said that he would be interested in being part of the group as well.
Yeah, I think it's so the names we have now, it's a little bit Europe heavy, let's say. And I think we should actively try to find participants from other parts of the world as well. And I have some names in mind already. I will approach several people and ask them whether they want to contribute. I think this the participants we have here today in the meeting, it's just a small part of interested people, I would say.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so, yeah, also leads us to the question, okay, how should the group communicate? Well, like we have the list of members, and this is we then have an email list for everybody and just send regular emails, or should we create a mailing list for that purpose, or should there be a Slack channel in the TDWG workspace? Yeah, since we so far the past years we only met during the TDWG workshop week, there was no way to, or no need to reach out to all of the group members in particular, because the general email was sent out to everybody, and whoever was interested just joined in. But I guess for like practical reasons, I'd say we just use regular emails for now, group emails, and if we do have more settled team, we can still discuss other options of communication. And plus, we still have the GitHub pages, but so for issues and the regular files. But at the moment, I'm a bit hesitant to start the GitHub wiki parts, because I have the feeling that this would be like another field where like there might be initial bursts of activity, but then they are just another corner to maintain. Deb?
I'm not sure anybody's taken this method to try yet, but instead of the wiki, although it would work similarly, David, the GitHub now has a discussion page similar to the way it's done in the wiki, right? I'm sorry, in Wikipedia or Wikidata, right? Where there can be a discussion page associated and conversations can happen there. I don't know if that would be useful or not, but
that is a good point.
I don't know if it's a feature in GitHub. I don't know that if we've enabled that in the TDWG GitHub or not. I'd have to go look, but I'm on too many GitHub sites and I'm confused. I have to go look myself.
I see it on the TDWG ABCD page, but and as an administrator there, I can enable it.
It's an idea. It's not.
But interesting point. I haven't worked with GitHub discussions yet, but I remember seeing the announcement. But other than that, no, it was not on my mind. Good point.
It does make them transparent, right? It does allow, and it's probably a little bit less than a wiki in terms of upkeep and maintenance. It's more, more of a running discussion, but.
So far we had like a couple of cases where we did have things that would probably better fit under those discussion pages, but just had them as issues. Somebody just raised a question as an issue, and an answer was given, and the issue was closed. So this is also a way to use it.
Yeah, David. So something, and I don't think it's difficult to do well, but something that I have been hearing, if you're new to this community and you haven't been active in something like TDWG or standards development for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, right? There are stories or there are references or comments, right, that people refer to when they're in those big, long, like a GitHub thread, right? You've got a ticket or an issue and it gets very, very long. And people are like, well, I don't understand this part, or I don't understand that part, or what is Rich Pyle talking about here? I don't get it. And we've been talking about ways in which you could more effectively use discussion. You know, let's move the discussion over here, get everybody going, and then go back to the issue and say, you know, we had the discussion, and then post more succinctly to the issue. But I don't know. It's a way of work that people have to figure out what works best for their group.
I think it also depends on, you know, is the discussion a part of some official process, like, for example, public comment? And if that's the case, then it really probably should be in GitHub, because that should all be preserved as a part of the record, which would be different than just like general discussion.
Jutta, you wanted to say something?
I activated myself by accident, but since I'm online, I'm not quite sure I understand. So like in Latimer Core, like I joined the group a year ago and I had no experience, and what really helps is to have regular group meetings and start to be in the actual discussions, and then you start to understand actually what's happening on GitHub. So yeah, so since you're more in the maintenance mode, I'm not quite sure. I like the issues. I don't see the discussion page, I have to admit.
No, it's not enabled yet.
Okay.
I see it as an administrator, see the feature that I could enable with one click, but it's not there yet.
So,
Okay, thank you.
One way, David, I think you could ask here, I'm looking at everybody's names. I'm assuming everybody here is active on GitHub. I'm looking at everybody has a GitHub account in this particular group. And then Steve's point about making sure that the work is, the comments, the conversation is public where it needs to be. That could help you figure out where to have these conversations.
That's a good point. Yeah, just and this would also yeah, open up the discussion for those who are not here today. Yeah.
okay. So I don't have the bandwidth to join the group, but I kind of like would like to be updated, kind of know what you are doing. And I think for me it would be most helpful if you had something like a mailing list or some where even on Slack, if you had regular, like if something is happening, there would be a place where I would just get the updates, and then those updates would point me to the correct place where to look if it is an issue or whatever. So yeah.
Yeah, this is a good point, having like a low commitment way of showing general interest and being informed without like yeah, being part of the core group. Deb?
David, can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
The two things. One is you're the second person, Jutta, to sort of ask for, somebody at TDWG 2022 asked me, could they have a sort of a newsletter kind of thing where several times a year, right, what's going on in the different groups. And I was trying to figure out how to bring that to the exec where we could talk about an easier way to compile that. So one person isn't tasked with having to dig and hunt and beg people to give them updates. Is there like a Google form where people could fill it out and then it would self-compile, right? Here's the latest from all the different groups who filled out the form. The other sort of maybe more direct way to start, and maybe you already do this, is to follow the repo, right? Is to go and check, to watch the GitHub repo, so that when there's an update to a ticket, when an issue has been posted, you get an email and you can actually see that that group's active and what they're working on. So that's the way I keep up anyway with a lot of them, is I watch the GitHub repo. And if you don't know how to do that, ping me and I'll show you.
Yeah, but I also do this for several of the groups. but some of them that are like quite active, then you get a lot of automated emails. Maybe I could fine tune this a bit further, but there are some where it's like I open up my computer on Monday and say, oh, I got 20 emails from this one group, and just generally archive them. Oh, good point. Watch, not follow. Oh, no.
I probably misspoke. Thanks for that, Steve. Yeah, no, it's David.
Yeah.
It's a balancing act. Well, no matter what you choose,
certainly,
right? If you put it in
But-
Slack and then you get an @
Mm.
channel, and all of a sudden you know you have to go, okay, or you've been tagged, right? Oh, you
Yeah.
did.
So in the tag session, Steve, you mentioned that there's a question if the mailing list should be continued or not. But actually, it would be a good place to, if groups wanted to send out like an update or inform the community about something that is happening. That would be a good place, or the Slack, the general TDWG Slack. Yeah, because you don't want to get you don't want to be inundated by GitHub messages.
In the past, this email list was the default place where discussions happen, and then there was some concern that it was, there was too much traffic, it was ineffective, and then I think at that point people recommended the GitHub. Like, for example, if there was public comment, it would all happen on this email list, and sometimes that generated a huge amount of traffic. And I think that was where there was a desire to move to GitHub issue tracker, because then you could like opt in or opt out on particular discussions. So, the problem with the email list is that people just don't know about it anymore. I mean, like, I'm on it, and I think a whole year's gone by, and I'm not sure that any messages have gone out, versus if you look in the history of it, there are some years where there's 500 messages or whatever. So it just it seems to be a communication system that's just not being used anymore, which doesn't mean it couldn't be, but I just think it's not at the moment.
Well, I don't think about the discussions, I just think about updates. Just like to have like a central update space, so that a discussion is actually happening on GitHub. I also would agree that GitHub is a better place for that.
Yeah. I also don't really have a good solution. If there is I can imagine having like once every couple of months, maybe 3 months or something like that, and a general email from TDWG with like, here are the activities of all of the different groups, one general email to everybody with the links, and then have the individual interest groups. The way I could imagine this being, it's like there's the template file in GitHub, saying, okay, this is the upcoming report. Here are the different sections, and if you and then there's an email sent out to all of the conveners saying, if you have something that you would like to be reported in the next email, please add it in this file, and then the conveners can create a GitHub pull request and add their information there. And if they don't, then they they can just ignore it, and by the end of the deadline, just the content of that page is copied and pasted into the mailing list and sent out. Maybe some minor formatting, things like that, but yeah, that would be my quick idea of a relative low maintenance way of approaching this topic.
Yeah, you've captured my idea. That's what I was trying to say about how to make it easy.
Wikidata community does this similar with their regular newsletter. They send out a weekly newsletter, like what has happened in Wikidata. And once the email is sent out, the new template for the upcoming week is created. And then you know that whenever you have something, I don't know, you write a publication that's related to Wikidata, and it gets published, and then you can just go on there, add the link, and it will be included in the next email. And then the people who actually maintain the newsletter themselves, they just continue to work on that wiki page as well. And then once it's time to send it out, that version gets archived as the version for that particular date, and a new template is created. So this would be the email link for Wikidata. Having this, and then it's always this URL, but next, and then it gets filled up, and usually on Mondays, it's probably the current one. On Mondays they are sent out. Okay, back to ABCD. As I mentioned, we do have quite an outdated charter, and I kind of started on drafting a new one, which now should probably be renamed to maintenance group. And I used it based on the old version that is still on the old community page that is so old that it's actually hidden in the TDWG side menu. So you can only find this, pasted before, but here it's again. You can only find it if you do have the correct link for it, and not by going through the menu. And I first thought I cut out a couple of things where okay, this is like really outdated. I try to update a few things, and I added the comments from the template that TDWG provides for the interest groups. Steve already mentioned those definitions for what's a core member, we do have then those parts on like what's the motivation of the group, and the goals, outputs, and outcomes. So this section actually it was on the old page, but this is from the template for the task groups, and not for the interest groups. So this is one of those sections where I would recommend just to remove it and move the particular standards that I mentioned, maybe at the bottom to resources, or just leave it with that and say, okay, the different versions of the standards can be found on the general page that is linked there anyway. And the same for the strategy. That again, I would delete because it's from the template for the task groups. The section on becoming involved is actually required. Most of the other ones are not. And here, I guess the way to get involved would be just to if you want to join the meetings, contact the conveners, get invitations, or follow the GitHub repository. And then if you have any questions or problems, create a ticket, or maybe if you decide to create a discussion, a GitHub discussion. But for now, just I'd say stay with the tickets. And and then the other sections. Since the charter needs to be approved by the executive committee, I'd rather say to keep it short and concise, and also with a limited time available. So my idea here would be to rework what is necessary, and maybe cut out some of the parts for the motivation, reduce it a bit, Yeah, I'm a bit torn whether to add something about the history, some historic remarks. Also, since I'm probably not the best person to write about this, as I wasn't part of it for most of the cases. Yeah, any thoughts, inputs on that? Yeah, okay. Steve mentioned that in the chat that one way was to post the upcoming meeting as a GitHub issue, so it's like always quite on top. That would certainly be a good way of doing this, and it's requires less work than keeping some subpage up to date. Good point. Yeah, it's certainly it's sometimes people like need to remind us, but yeah, not a substitute. Okay, then there's no input on that. Then similar vein, there is the interest group report that is due next week. I haven't started on this, but since there are only basically 2 big points to report about, the working sessions with the plenary core people on general what I introduced in the beginning, and then the work on the re-ratification, similar to what we already presented in TDWG, both in the session about the standards and in the closing session with the reports. So that's a couple of points to add there, but not that much work. And then we have one part that is when we when I prepared the re-ratification, I noticed that there are actually a couple of elements that don't have any definitions. Some of them are pretty easy because it's like elements that were added later and never had definitions in the XML schema. But a couple of the easy ones are things like GeoIDs for certain elements. Those I can write quite quickly without like proper without me needing to get into those issues. But then there are a couple of ones where it's a bit beyond the depth of my knowledge, and so I would like to get some input from the group. Maybe there's people here who already are familiar with the topics. Maybe there are people here who know a bit about the history of ABCD, what was meant with those elements when they were created, and then, or maybe who know people who to contact to give like suitable definition for a term. And if we do have it here in the minutes, in the agenda, we have for the site coordinate sets, there are 3 attributes: original, begin, and end. To be honest, I don't know what they mean. And especially for the attributes, it's a bit more tricky to add definitions in the schema, I think. I'm not quite sure. For the depth, we have the datum, again, this is where I could yeah, my understanding of that element would be to that is the depth in terms of the mean sea level, if it's in the ocean, and then depending on the geographic datum, what is the mean sea level at that position. But that's just an assumption. I don't know for sure.
David, since many of the elements are originally stemming from the biosize model, it could be worthwhile looking into the biosize model, whether there are definitions available. And other reasons could be that some elements are simply a mistake. It could also, I mean, the datum, I'm not sure, I haven't seen it in the context of depth so far, so I'm not sure. You'll find out.
Yeah. I just haven't. So the image color space, I'm confident that I can come up with a definition in that regard. And there was some old discussions where Bob Morris has written something that this entire element was put into question. But in the old comments, we do have a link to an external document, but that is a yeah, the link is dead, and there's no archived version of it. But I can yeah, I can write something, and the idea here was for the re-ratification of ABCD2 just to take the elements as they are and don't do any fix-up work. So we did simplify that element. So in ABCD3, there is an element just image color space, but the whole part of profile name and profile ref, it's just see, I made a copy and paste profile name and profile ref. We have removed, and image color space itself is now just the a text field. So if yeah, where you can add like sRGB or Adobe RGB, things like that. And then what's giving me the most trouble are the three elements about the cultural collection unit. So the growth condition atomized aerobicity, the applications, the hazard, I can kind of make a guess on what it could mean. Meaning that's like, I don't know if there are certain elements where protected from insects and things like that, but some chemicals that now need to be marked as hazardous for people who are handling this. No, but it's a cultural collection unit. It's not. I'm sorry, I was thinking too much of a barium sheet. And then the mycological unit, mycological sex stage. And again, for the named areas data source, I have understanding what this could mean, and just like, where did you get the source where you got the higher areas? Subject park fungi. That's a good. Might be interesting to look at this a bit further. Yeah. So anybody else who has some insights on those elements besides my wild guesses?
So for the mycology, I just put in some works that I did earlier this year in connection with the Audubon chord subject part vocabulary. So that was the mycological stage. Maybe it fits, maybe not. So let me know.
Okay, I have to look at this. I just quickly scanned the link and thought, okay, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Okay, and then for last part on today's agenda, I would like to kind of look at, should do this with shared screen. I'd like to look through the GitHub issue tracker and see if we have anything there that people might be able to contribute, or some discussions. And it's good to see that Sam is here, because this is we currently have 6 open issues, and I guess we can put some of them. Okay, we'll start from top, start from bottom. No, let's just start from the top with the newest record, and that's the record basis enumeration does not match ABCD EFG implementation. And since Sam reported this, Sam, do you want to do the introduction to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is something that came up when we were implementing. We wanted to collect the data from geological collections for DISCO, and I was checking, and based in the DISCO infrastructure, I had a check on the record basis, because we were only interested in actual physical specimens, so the preserved specimen I collected, but things like human observation I ignored. And when I started ingesting the geological specimen, I found that, well, I ran it through a Java process, and all the fields were empty, and then I started looking into it, and then I found that most of the base of record fields that are in there are not in the enumeration that is in the really either the ABCD 2.06 or the ABC3. In the ABC3 standard, there is an additional record basis, I think, for rock specimen or mineral specimen. But for most, there's nothing in there. I did have a conversation with Jörg and David about this, and I think it also points maybe to a more general issue that I see with ABCD, is that a lot of ABCD that's going around isn't really compliant to the XSD standards. In this case, it's really particular because, well, this is a field used by us, but also by GeoCase to, group specimen data. But all of the BioCase endpoints providing geological collection data use the base of record field differently. So here it's rock specimen, but because I've also seen specimen, sediment specimen or model specimen. Yeah, and my idea initially was, well, maybe if we could fix or add a couple more types in the ABCD standard, that would at least cover the use cases of GeoCase, which is already a production implementation based on the ABCD standard. Yeah, but I'm not too sure if that's still the right solution. Yeah. So that's more or less the issue. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jörg.
I think this is not a question of the standard, but it's an issue of the implementation. In this case, it's BioCase, and I think it dates back to the time that ABCD2 was introduced, which was 15 years ago, and back then the main goal was to mobilize as much data as possible. And by restricting or by enforcing vocabularies too strictly, we would have lost too many data providers. So I think it's it's different now. And any implementation now would definitely enforce those vocabularies. So I think it's not related really to the ABCD standard.
Well, if you would say, well, we pick the ABCD3 standard, then I think the geological collections could not provide their data anymore, because there are now production applications built with the expectation that there is an option to indicate that it's a rock specimen or a meteorite specimen. And this is not information that you can capture in the ABCD3 standard. So I think the issue is then still the same. That
so actually it's two different things. So it's one issue is that you can put anything with BioCase and ABCD2, and the second thing is extending ABCD3 with these additional items, right?
Yeah.
So we should split that.
Yeah, precisely. And I think that the second part is where this actual issue is more about, because I think that's more of the standard part is.
Sure.
I think my suggestion here was, should we extend the ABCD3 standard with a couple of additional record basis enumeration types to be in line with how it's currently being used within GeoCase.
My knowledge about XML schema, the particulars, is a bit rusty, but I'm wondering whether this is a possibility to have the record basis in ABCD EFG that says, okay, this is oh, no, never
I don't think so. The thing is that EFG is an extension of ABCD3, so the record basis is always the same as ABCD3.
The ABCD field, yes, okay.
Yeah. And there has been in the 3.0, there has been, I don't know which one, there's been one added, but not the others. You probably checked it.
I think that mineral specimen is the new one.
Oh yeah,
based on the text you wrote here. Yes, this is one problem I have with XML schema in general, that it's like either all or nothing in terms of like validation. You either have to specify a list and say only those are valid, or you leave it completely open. It's something I really would love to see. Would be some kind of like having a default recommended vocabulary, saying, okay, those are the terms we would like to see, and if you don't follow those and try to validate it, then it just gives a warning, but it still passes. But I'm not sure whether we have the power to influence XML schema in that regard. So we do have to work with the cards that we are dealt. Any other input from the group in terms of should this be something where we just have to accept that elements that documents will be invalid because it's just the way it has been, or whether we do need to remove the control terms from the schema and only have it in the standards documentation to say, okay, those are the elements we expect here, or
I think these are two things. The first thing is that we shouldn't remove anything from the schema, because right now I think everyone or most of the providers can stick to that vocabulary. It was really back then that we thought we shouldn't do that. And the other question is about extending the vocabulary, and I think I couldn't think of any reason not to do that. Would there be any reason not to include mineral specimen?
Not really, no. The only if you just try to argue that in terms of, okay, it's one ABCD is like the core for biological and the extension is for geological things, and that would mix this up. But since they are using the same element, and EFG is one of the most prominent extensions, and the development of those really go together, we might as well just say, okay, we add those elements in there and then put in the specification, we say, okay, those are in here for the EFG extension.
Well, you already have that, for example, GGBN. You have record basis material sample, and you need the GGBN extension. So
yeah,
you already have that.
And then
but you have a record basis where you need an extension for.
Yeah. The question is, should we then also create one term for other? So we see we have unspecified here in the list, but this is the kind of like, okay, it's not given, but other saying, okay, something we do have something that is explicitly not in that list, but it's covered, I don't know, by a particular extension or something like that.
There's already other specimen.
Oh, there. Of course, yeah. Never mind.
Yeah. So that.
Oh, yeah, good to have
that
that already is, yes.
Yeah, and I think probably should add unspecified. Mineral specimen is already there, so it's meteorite specimen and rock specimen. And I think if we add those two,
I think we don't need unspecified, because unspecified would be the same as not specify anything.
Yeah.
Record basis is, I think it's one of the mandatory elements.
Terms, also.
So if you simply don't know,
so actually you provide a way to work around
avoid
mandatory thing.
Yeah,
so it's contradictory. You should remove the mandatory thing then.
Jutta?
I'm not in this issue and not quite sure if I follow everything, but this sounds very much what we are doing in the material samples group, actually. So if you're trying to define like real vocabulary terms and so on, it might make sense to put that to the material samples group and see how that meshes.
Yeah, good point. It's like I guess with ABCD being around for so long, and then just discussing our own things like minor adjustments, we sometimes tend to forget to look at what has happened in the last couple of years with other groups. And yes, certainly material sample group would be really good for aligning those, and especially since we don't. This is also like one of the other issues that need to be need to be handled before the re-ratification. So those controlled vocabulary terms also need to be defined. And currently in ABCD, there are not. So that they are just lists in the terms of restrictions. There are no definitions for those. So this is actually still a point that we do need. And so this, I guess, would make a really good point to align and just say, okay, we do have those terms that are identical to what the material sample group has come up with, and so we might as well just reuse the same definitions and then have like a real proper alignment of those terms. Okay, so this is like a yeah, consensus here, as far as I see it, for ABCD 3 to extend that. I will take this with me. We do have a couple of more minutes, so we might as well just use it to look into the other issues. Quentin has asked a question on what is regarding the identifiers of person. I answered that. I think, let me just double check. I think there's no more, I might have, could have just closed this after this. Can a person be uniquely identified with one or more, one of more identifiers in ABCD? And then ABCD 2, it works a bit tricky, and ABCD 3, we do have, we did some changes and then have repeatable URIs. So yes, I think, yeah, I think this issue is, you can just close it. And I think the answer was sufficient. Maybe I'll read through it later again, like carefully, but I think that was all for it. Then Falco has suggested to add an element for the agent who issued an acquisition, was acquired from. I guess this is also falls into the realm of yeah, new additions. So we have the element was required from, and what he suggested was to have a complementary element was acquired by to document who made the acquisition. Okay, yeah, I can see that there might be use cases for that. Then we have two issues by Steve regarding ABCD 3, the ontological export. And one was a really clear issue within the export script that I just haven't come around to fix yet. The other one is regarding the matching of the properties. Yeah, I'm aware of that. It's still open. And one other thing that also might be worth discussing here in a couple of minutes, Jorrit Pullen suggested to have a MIME type for ABCD archives, so that when when a client is serving ABCD, then this would show up and show a client on how to handle this. And I wrote an answer back then saying, okay, it could be possible, and have something combined saying, okay, we do have ABC XML, which is then zipped. So this is something that this is a common practice if you have a MIME type that is then also zipped. But to be honest, I'm not quite sure whether there's actually proper need for this. And I think he had suggested a similar one for Darwin Core as well at the same time. How did that discussion work out? Apparently they had I'm trying to clean up aging issues somehow. And so as far as I can see, what I took from the discussion is folks already use Darwin Core Archive MIME types, formal registering. Okay, yeah, formally, but it's not formally registered. So if they came to that discussion, then I guess we can just suggest that if anybody wants to do this, then those would be the proper elements, but the proper MIME types to use. But yeah, I don't see the need to properly register those MIME types. Yeah, so this is a bit the overview of the open issues we have, and we are now at the 1.5 hour mark. Are there any other issues, questions, comments regarding the interest group? Okay, that doesn't seem to be the case. Well, thank you all for attending and for the interesting discussions. Yeah, I guess I will contact everybody who has at some point signaled interest in being part of that group, even though not as a core member, according to the TEDx sense. If we do look for a new date for an upcoming meeting. And if you have any other questions or issues, just open a GitHub issue for that. Well, thanks, and yeah, have a good rest of your day, depending on your time zone.
Thanks, David. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.